When we talk about networking cables, most people are going to think about RJ45 copper Ethernet cables. But as an IT professional, you will use and you'll encounter many different other kinds. And which type of cables we use depends on what we need them for. Some are cheaper, some are more secure, some are faster. So we choose the cable that's appropriate for our implementation. And from our perspective, of course, we need to consider the security vulnerabilities that each cable type has. We covered at a high level what EMI is, as well as crosstalk. EMI is the electromagnetic interference that can disrupt the availability and integrity, and crosstalk is electricity jumping from one cable to another if the cable is not shielded and they run too close together. That can be a confidentiality issue. We haven't covered attenuation yet, but it's basically the further away from the central we get, the weaker the signal is. Most copper lines will have attenuation. If you have a DSL line at home, the further you are from the central, or the DSLAM, digital subscriber line access multiplexer, the lower speed you get. If you're within half a mile, you can probably get optimal speeds. If you're a mile or two away, or 2 or 3 kilometers away, your speed is going to be significantly decreased, and will hit 5 or 6 kilometers away from the central, you're not really going to get any connection that's worth mentioning. From an ISP perspective, if we have copper cables running between our DSLAMs, we'll use amplifiers in between, something that will accept the weak signal in, amplify it, and send it out again. But in most cases, between all of our centrals, all of our DSLAMs, from an ISP perspective at least, we would have fiber, which has no attenuation. Over here on the right, you can see a picture from the ISP I worked at. One spring, Denmark had a tremendous amount of rain, much more than we normally get. There was a lot of flooding, and for some mysterious reason, they had chosen to put that data center with the DSLAM in the basement. You can in the bottom right corner see the tile pulled up from the subflooring, but you can also see the very clear line of how far the dirty water came up on the equipment. Obviously, nothing worked. And because some of the repair work took months, because it was not just 1 or 2 places it was destroyed, it was in many places, and on top of that many of our cables were compromised, we actually ended up sending out the little USB dongles or MiFis to all the customers that were affected in that area, just to make sure they would have some sort of internet connection while we're fixing the problem. We talked about the twisted pair cables before, and the 2 versions that come in. The by far most commonly used network cable is an unshielded twisted pair, and as you may or may not know, a regular Ethernet cable has 8 cables run inside it, and each of the cable pairs are twisted, hence the name. So on the right here, you can see an unshielded twisted pair cable cut open, and then below it a shielded twisted pair cable. On the individual pairs of cables, you can see it has a metal coating around it, then that has another coat on top of it, making the cable a lot less susceptible to EMI or crosstalk, but also making it much more expensive and a lot stiffer. For regular UGP cables, twisting the individual pairs makes it less susceptible to EMI, and for those, we would normally use one cable to send and one cable to receive. And the tighter the cables are wound, the less susceptible to EMI they are. So for instance, CAT3, which we really don't use anymore, is not very tightly wound, it's more susceptible than for instance a CAT6 cable, which is much more tightly wound. Right now, most of the cables you use are CAT5, 6, or maybe even 7. In most of our office environments, we would use the UGP cables. They're not more than a couple of dollars per cable, whereas the STP equivalent could be $10 or $15. And in most cases, the cable is just run from a patch panel in the wall to our computer. But in places where we do need more security, we don't want the crosstalk or the EMI, we can use the shielded twisted pair cables to prevent some of that. I would probably also know that the connectors that we plug the cables into our PCs and our switches, you know, the rectangle clear piece of plastic, if it's for computers, is an RJ45 connector, and if it's a smaller one, almost square one, that you plug into your phone, is an RJ11. You may also run into coax cables. They're most commonly used for cable TV or internet services. We'll have a couple of pictures of them over here on the right. Coax cables are built in layers. The inner copper core is where the data is transferred. Around the copper core is a plastic insulator, and then around that again is a copper shield or a copper braid to protect from EMI. And then finally we have an outer plastic layer, and that's the cable you'd see. Having the braid or the shield makes those cables a lot less susceptible to EMI, and because the copper core is so much thicker, it can provide higher speeds. But for our day-to-day networks, we would rarely use them. Which then takes us to fiber cables. Fiber cables use light to carry the data, whereas the copper cables use electricity. And they have a lot of pros, and obviously then also some cons. You can get really fast connections over fiber. I think the current record is about a petabit per second over a 50-kilometer stretch with a single fiber cable. And since the fiber cables don't have attenuation like copper does, you can also have really long cables. I think the current longest one in use is about 150 miles or 240 kilometers long, just one single unbroken cable. And then fiber is much more secure than copper because you can't just attach the sniffer. There is no emanations, there is no crosstalk. We can run the fiber cables right next to the power and it doesn't matter because it's not electricity. So that's all the good stuff. Now the not so good stuff. They are more expensive. For data center cables, for instance, if you need a 30-foot, a 10-meter copper cable, it's probably going to be $20 or something like that. But if you need a multimode fiber, OM3 or 4, same length, you're looking at more like $100. So price is obviously a factor. It's also more difficult to use. Since the cable inside is a glass strand, you can break it if you bend it too much, which then means no data. If at any point during your exam you get a question saying, secure cable, fiber is your answer. Also look for the keywords. If it says something about not susceptible or susceptible to EMI, then you know it's either copper or fiber. Fiber is not susceptible, copper is. In general, 2 types of fiber cables we use. Single mode fiber is a single strand of fiber that carries a single mode or type of light down the center. This is used for the long distance cables, IP backbones, long haul service providers. In many cases, not something you'd run into in your data center. What you most likely would see would be multimode fiber. Multimode fiber uses different light colors, carry multiple data streams simultaneously. And we do this using wavelength division multiplexing, where the different modes of the different colors of light is sent and then received as a unique data stream. Over here on the right, you can see a single mode fiber. If you peel that little white connector cap off, you'd see the actual fiber. In this case, even though it is a single mode fiber, we also have a send and receive. You can kind of think of it like a simplex solution. We only send one way on one and receive on the other. Each of them are independent, and since we need to both send and receive, we have 2 cables. The last image is light through fiber strands. Many of those are even used in decorations or costumes because they look pretty cool. As you can see, the fiber strands over there are really fine. They're no more than a millimeter thick. All cables are measured in metrics, so they are then meters or kilometers, which makes sense because only 3 countries in the world out of the 200 or something countries there are does not use the metric system. That's Burma, Liberia, and the United States. When we calculate the speed of a connection, we do it in kilobits, megabits, gigabits, terabits, and so on. And basically, in every time we skip up a step, we multiply by 1,000. So 1 kilobit is 1,000 bits per second. 1 megabit is 1 million bits per second. Most of the internet connections today are somewhere in the megabit or in some cases gigabits per second, but as you saw with some of the fiber connections, we actually have petabit connections in the IP backbone. Over on the right, I have a little chart of the commonly used cable types and some of the legacy ones as well. Cat 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all legacy cables. Cat 1 are all full cables. Cat 2 we use for token ring networks. Cat 3 were token ring and 10 base T cables. That's somewhere in the 90s, I think. Cat 4 were also token ring cables, 16 megabit per second per cable. The ones we use today for Ethernet copper cables would be Cat 5, 6, or 7. Regular Cat 5 cables can only do 100 megabits per second and are mostly phased out by now. Cat 5e is mostly what we use on our workstations today. The signal can go for about 100 meters before the attenuation is too high. In our data centers, it's also common to use Cat 6, 6A, or 7 cables for our servers or anything that needs more of speed. Cat 6 and 6A carries 10 gigs of data up to 55 meters. Cat 7, again 10 gigs of data, but it can go up to 100 meters. I know places where they use that, but really preferable, we would want to use fiber cables. FIDI cables, OM1 and OM2 cables are not really used anymore either. They are to a large extent legacy. What we do use is OM3 and 4, where you can see the speeds gets a lot more interesting. Really the 2 things we care about with our cables is how fast are they and how far can we send the data. So every time we update and add another classifications, it's either one of those 2 or both of them that gets updated. If we look at the OM3 cable, you can see it can send 1 gigabit per second over 550 meters, or 10 gigabits per second over 300 meters, or 40 or 100 over 100 meters. This is another good reason why we want to use them in our data center. We can get really fast speeds with them. And since our data center is a small area, we use the multimode fiber. There's not really that many classifications for single mode fiber. Most of us will never use them. They're used in the IP backbone and the long haul service providers, either between 2 internet service providers or in the IP backbone of 1 service provider. But if you look at the speed differences between multimode and single mode, they're tremendous. One cable can carry 1 petabit per second, whereas the OM4 multimode fibers can carry up to 100 gigabits per second. That's 10,000 times faster with a single mode fiber. I don't think there's a lot of places where we practically use the 1 petabit per second fiber, but it is pretty amazing. Most of them would use lower speeds and much longer cables. If you look at the cable that's 240 kilometers long, It still sends 69 terabits of data per second, or 690 times as fast as the fastest multimode fiber cable.